Brother Warren. And good evening, everybody. And it's nice to be here, and we can share those things in which our hope is based. Those things in which we have great hope. Just since the last class, I just wanted to quickly summarise what we've sort of looked at so far in our classes. And in our first class, we just took that divine advice out of Isaiah 51, if you're seeking righteousness and you're seeking my face, then look to Abram, your father, and to Sarah, your mother. And so we did that, and we looked at the foundation of Abram's faith was at his call when the God of glory appeared unto him in Ur of the Chaldees, and it was the very foundation of his faith, and he was introduced to the power and majesty of Yahweh in that place. He understood him to be as a king who sat upon the flood. And his response to meeting Yahweh in that way was obedience. And you see that here even in this chapter tonight, the emphasis on obedience, because it was disobedience that brought the consequences of which we suffer today. And it's obedience which removes those consequences. And he was obedient. And we looked at the consequences of that of Abrahamic faith, and the fact was that God would bestow righteousness on that individual, the righteousness which we know as the righteousness of faith. It comes through faith, and Yahweh calls it my righteousness, he says in Isaiah 51, and it's forever. In the next class, we considered faith tested. And so the first class, foundation of faith. Second class, faith tested. And we looked at Bethel to Bethel. And we saw that Abram he moved to Bethel, and he built an altar there, and he called on the name of Yahweh. And we looked there, and we saw how that when we call upon the name, we're calling upon the name because we're asking to be delivered from death. And we looked at that. We understand the name, the character of God. We can call upon the name. And so Abram's there at Bethel, he's calling upon the name, he understands that Yahweh can deliver from death. And so he's subject to the trial and the testing of that faith. They go down to Egypt, and as soon as Abram comes to the border of Egypt, his faith drains out of him, and he finds himself subject to the fear of death. And that skewed his thinking, we saw in his judgment. And we thought about the principle there, what's not of faith is therefore sin. Paul speaks that in Romans. So as faith drained away, that just left sin in its place. That's what we are by default. That's just our natural default setting. And we saw the submission of Sarah. Abraham had to learn here also a deep appreciation for his wife. When he came up out of Egypt, it says Abram came up and his wife. So he learned a deep appreciation for his partner, which obviously Yahweh had provided for him. She was faithful, she had that incorruptible spirit, it says. She submitted to her husband, she called him Lord. And in Pharaoh's harem, remember, there was this outward beauty that Sarah had. She was it was in their bloodlines, that outward beauty, but she had that other aspect of beauty, and that is the beauty of holiness. And so she was a remarkable woman because of that. And so they were delivered out of Egypt because of Sarah's faithfulness. And then last class, we looked at faith being nurtured, the comforting of Sarah. We saw the importance of the birth of Isaac, because we've got 15 chapters on Abram's life, and 4 of those chapters are dedicated to the birth of Isaac. So this bringing forth of Abram's seed, just 1 year, 4 chapters out of 100 years. So it's obviously very, very important. And we saw in that it's the manner of birth that's so important to the seed of Abram, the way in which they're begotten. There was the necessity that there be barrenness. Sarah comes into the record barren. But of course, they had to wait until Abram couldn't produce a child either. And the very sign of this multitudinous Abrahamic seed would be the sign of circumcision, the cutting away of the flesh of the foreskin, to make it absolutely clear that Abram's seed are not produced by the flesh, but only by divine intervention. In fact, all of Abram's seed are begotten of God. And Abram believed that in Genesis 17, and he fell on his face, and he glorified God, but Sarah had yet to come to faith, and so they ended up, all those arrangements that were made for Sarah to come to faith, going down to the house of Abimelech, the shutting up of the wombs in Abimelech's house, Sarah's witnessing of Abraham's intercessory prayer, all these things arranged. You see divine care. You think about that, then bring that into your own life. The divine care that you might come to judge him faithful who has promised. That's what it says in Hebrews, to come to that. To judge him faithful. That's why we keep singing that hymn every start of the class. Great is thy faithfulness. Yahweh's constancy, his promises that he will fulfill. We have to believe in that. And Sarah came to that point where she could therefore conceive seed. And so in our class tonight, we want to come to the perfecting of faith, and that's the offering of Isaac. Now we all know the story in that. So what we want to consider is the completion of this vessel, Abram, a vessel unto honour, was completed here. The perfecting of faith comes out of this process. We want to just consider what gave Abram the strength to endure this trial, and what does it mean to offer an only begotten son. We want to just briefly look and see there's an 8-step process in this chapter as it's being outworked. We want to understand what the phrase means to see the place afar off. So we want to see that as a parable of the offering of the Son of God. And we will worship and return. We want to just look at the offering of Isaac, and then what God said, because you've done this thing. Those are sort of some things you just want to cover off in the class tonight. So the first thing we just want to talk about for a moment is the completion of a vessel. And we're thinking about Abram. The thing is, like, it was a trial. It's in the record as a test for Abram. But of course it was a test for Sarah. It doesn't say that. Sarah's silent here in the record. It focuses on Abram, and we'll understand why. But Sarah, remember, she would take the role of Mary. And Mary is told, a sword shall pierce your own soul. Remember, she was the mother who would have to watch the offering of an only begotten son. And a sword would pierce her soul at the time. So Sarah was not involved here. We don't see her, but we understand that she would have been subject to what came out of this trial. In Romans, remember, he says the potter has power over the clay. Paul says in Romans 9 to make it the same lump, one vessel unto honour and another to dishonour. He's talking about divine election, and he's using the example of Moses and Pharaoh there. We just want to bring that here and think about Abraham. The potter has the power over the clay. And Paul says there he's making vessels of mercy that he's before prepared for glory. So here's the perfecting of a vessel that's going to be the bearer of divine glory. And it's on, and as Paul says, it's on those whom he's called, Abram's seed, those who are called like their father, not just of the Jewish nation, but also of the Gentiles. And so you see here this process of bringing this vessel to perfection. In other words, what happens here, and that the potter's got his hand on the vessel, he's shaping it right through Abram's life, he brings it to here, it's finished. We know that's the case because here he's told, God emphatically tells him, because you've done this thing, and I'm going to swear an oath and that he's justified him unto eternal life. The vessel's finished. And you see the process of preparing this vessel, and that has been a process of 64 years. And the vessel's brought to this completion by trial. So thinking about Abram, and we're thinking about the principle in our own lives. how we hope to be vessels unto honour, vessels that in time will bear divine glory. So there's a process, of course, that has to take place, that we are therefore fit to be bearers of that. And of course, we see this here in the offering of his son Isaac. But of course, this is, of course, but much more than that, because you see, and this is what really what I want to drive the class to, that in his obedient response, so there's the principle of obedience again, Abram would be entering into the experience of the Father himself and the offering of his only begotten Son for the sins of the world. It's this what we want to really see in that sense, because this was bringing him to the perfection of faith, this experience. And he would enter in and he would experience the cost of offering an only begotten Son. And he would have understood, we perhaps talk about that later, as soon as he's building an altar, that there's going to be an offering based upon Genesis 3:15. But really this is about entering in and understanding what the cost of that offering is. And of course, when he had done this thing, there was immediate response. Justification unto eternal life. Abram was justified by works. And there was absolute confirmation given at the end of this chapter, and the unconditional nature of the promises, therefore, because God could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, because you've done this thing. And there was the immutability of his counsel, as it says in Hebrews 6:13, that it was unchanging, and this would be unchangeable. And he interposed himself there with an oath. He was the absolute guarantor of this agreement that Abram would receive an eternal inheritance. And it's the added details then, of course, that are added to the promises, that his seed would be like the sand of the seashore, and his preeminent seed would possess the gate of his enemies, and all nations would be blessed in this arrangement. And all this added here because he had not withheld his only begotten Son, because you've done this thing. And James says, well, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered up Isaac his son upon the altar? Justified by works. You see, his faith was working out with his works. They worked together, and as a result of that, his faith was perfected. You see, we can say we believe something, but unless there's something that responds to that, there's something being seen in our lives, there's some trial, some testing, the vessel's being shaped, how can that faith come to perfection? And to bring it, that word means to bring an activity to a successful finish. And that's really what we want in our lives, isn't it? And James says, well, he was called the friend of God. And we have that ourselves. Christ has said, "Yeah, my friends, if you do whatsoever I command you." So you see this development of this vessel and the other things. And as we look at that, we want to, of course, bring it back into our own lives. I mean, the thing is, brothers and sisters, when you say you've been in the truth for so many years. A lot of us here have been in the truth for, I don't know, what, 30, 40 years, longer. And there must be in us, a feeling that something's happening to us. We're not the same as when we were baptised. There's been a progression. There's been something that's working within us, bringing us and changing us and preparing us for the future. And we have to feel that in our lives. I say to Brother Steve, and that, we talk here and say, oh, it's, something's happening. You've applied yourself to the Word, you stayed the course, something's happening. I think we've got to feel that in our lives. And you see that here, this process, because you see, this process that came to completion in Genesis 22 was a process of time. It began in the Ur of the Chaldees, and its obedient response, but that was just a beginning, just like baptism is a beginning for us. But by the time you come, and it's 25 years later, we're just given these snippets right through, you come into Genesis 17, and God then says to him, look, I want you to walk before me. This is now different again, and I'll build my covenant. I want you to walk before me to be complete. And you look it up and it says, this is what it means. It means absolute loyalty to a king. To condition the entire range of human experience by an awareness of his presence. Walk before me. And in response to his demands. You see, it's a process. We don't immediately come to that. But when we do come to it, we start to think about it. Because, if you're like me, you go out and your day can just be turned on its head. We just get caught up with the things that are natural to us. It's just how it is. But there has to become this process, of course, where we are leaning towards walking before God, walking before Yahweh in our daily life. And so that was Genesis 17. And you come now to Genesis 22, and of course it's probably another 33 years later. And God tests Abram. And it's interesting here when you come into the record, and you see, imagine that, he's been walking before God in his daily life. God just calls to him, in Genesis 22, and he just says, Abram. His response, here am I. It's like sometimes you go out to call someone, you're calling out their name. Where are they? You're yelling out to them. Come on. They're off doing something. Well, Abram, here's his response. It's just immediate. And you see, because it's just simply become a way of life. So by faith, Abram, when he was tried, he offered up Isaac. So there was this process, and of course that process, it's put in the record here like two bookends of his life in Genesis 12. There's a similar sort of process here. You think about from a moment, the similarity of these two bookends in his life. I want you to leave your country, I want you to leave your kindred and your father's house. You see, there's to leave your country. Okay, I can do that. Leave your kindred. That's just a bit more difficult. Now, I want you to leave your father's house behind. You see, there's just increasing sacrifice. But when we come to this chapter, I want you to take your son, your only son. It's Isaac whom you love. I want you to offer him for a burnt offering. You see, there's two bookends there, isn't it? But when you think about the magnitude of the difference, it's a massive difference. And that's been because there's been a development. There's been a development over that time. And he's obedient. You see, because Elohim, it says, that do his commandments, they hearken to the voice of his word, they're immortal and they're doing that. Here's Abram, and that's his life. It's become his life. So, when he comes to this test, and like we just read it so in the record, I'll take your son and offer him for a burnt offering. if you think about what's being said here, I think about it myself, like what that requires of a person to do that. To take a child, he wasn't a child anymore, of course, to take one of your children, and on the basis of faith, that God's going to raise him, offer him as a burnt offering. How could he do that? And the thing is, there's three words I think in the record of there, and one is in Romans 4, which isn't talking about this incident, it's talking about Genesis 17, and it said, he considered his own body now dead. He didn't stagger in unbelief. He was strong in faith. He gave glory to God. And it's in the word he considered. He thought things through. I often think about, it says in Genesis 18, he's sitting in the tent door, like in the heat of day. What's he doing? Well, I think he's considering. He's thinking about what God's doing. He's considering the process and all its implications. Well, Sarah's going to have a child. And then in Hebrews 11, when it's talking about this incident, it said he reasoned. He thought it through. He gave careful thought to the whole process. He let his mind dwell upon it. Okay, he said, in Isaac shall your seed be called. Now he's not going to turn away from that. So he reasoned that through, that then he must therefore be going to raise him. So you see, when Abram went to Mount Moriah, this is what I think, and we'll just say it in a phrase, when he went to Mount Moriah, he didn't go in a certain sense to see Isaac offered, although he would have to offer him. And we know the story, but Abram didn't. He went to Mount Moriah in faith to see him raised from the dead. And it's in a phrase here in Genesis 22. That's different again. You see, what we have to try and do is put ourselves into his shoes. We already know the outcome of the story. But he didn't know the outcome of the story. You have to put yourself in his shoes and think about the fact that he didn't know he was going to be stopped in that process. So there's two things. He considered it and he reasoned the whole thing through. And in Genesis 22 it tells us the other word and that is he feared. The angel of Yahweh called him out of the heaven and said, Abram, Abram, he says, and I love the way Brother Reg read it, because he read it absolutely right. He didn't say Abram, he said, Abram, Abram! Because there's an urgency, we'll see why there's an urgency that he stopped what he's doing. And you see, it says here, now I know you fear God. You fear Elohim. Now I know you fear Elohim. You see, because you see, he offered on the basis of his fear of God. Not his love. The record tells us it was on the basis of his fear of God. And that means that reverential awe. Not the fear is, we don't talk about the fear of God today because it's sort of, well, why would you be frightened of somebody? But it was his understanding, of course, that had already come from his call, the power and majesty of God when he'd been on his face and so forth, and the appearances when Yahweh appeared to him. And you see, what's the fear of God? The fear of God is when it overwhelms you and it excludes everything else out of your life except that fear. It's exclusive. And that's how you could do that. The fear of Yahweh is clean. It just pushes everything else out of a person's life. And it endures forever. It leaves God crowned as a king. The thing is, I remember years ago, you used to get the Jerusalem Post, and it was on the back, and it was a rabbi explaining what he thought the fear of God was about. And he said, well, the fear of God's like this. You've got a fear of dogs, you're walking on the street and a dog jumps out, you know what I mean? And you've got this at the thin end, at the small end, it means respect. At the other end, it means that's a big influence in my life. But he says if a lion suddenly jumps out, you've forgotten about the fact that you're frightened of a dog. But he said the fear of Yahweh is the greatest fear. And that's what I believe helped Abram through this process. Okay, so what does it mean, take an only begotten son? Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. And the thing is, it's the word's not that common in the Old Testament. It's used a few times in the New Testament. Thine only begotten son. And in the Old it means thine only one. The fact of the matter is, Abram had 7 other sons. He had Ishmael, and then he had the sons of Keturah, which 6 sons from Keturah, which I don't think is chronological, because Genesis 24 tells us Abram was old and well stricken in age, and it's about how he's going to send away these sons. But anyway, that doesn't matter. He had other sons, but he only had one only begotten son. So here was Isaac, a son born out of a barren womb, a son of promise who was given as a gift, a son provided by God, a son named by God, a son whom the covenant's going to be established. I mean, that would make that son a special son, but not an only begotten son. So Isaac was very special in that whole arrangement. But that doesn't describe the fact that he's an only begotten son. And we can understand what an only begotten son is when we turn to the New Testament. And John tells us, we behold his glory. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father. He was full of grace and truth. Here he was, the only begotten of the Father. We beheld his glory. So an only begotten son is the bearer of his Father's glory, or he is the bearer of his Father's character. You can have sons, but they'll not necessarily bear your character. An only begotten son does. And John says, no man has seen the Father at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. So the only begotten Son has a special relationship with his Father, whereas where he reclines in his bosom. At the upper room, how they laid like that, they laid on the ground sideways, and John put his head in Jesus' chest, in the bosom. So here it's speaking about the relationship between the Father and his only begotten Son. It's a relationship which is intimate. And not only that, he declares his Father and what he's doing. Look at that. He's just like his Father. And then 3 times the New Testament talks about it's like an only child. The widow of Nain, it was her only child. So you take this son and you offer him. And of course it says they went both of them together. And it says it twice in the record, we know that, because it's a related word. That was their relationship. And I know Abram says he'll command his children after him. They'll keep the way of Yahweh, do justice and judgment. they went both of them together on that basis. A godly son. So there's some thoughts there toward thinking about just towards this chapter. Now, when you come to the story in Genesis chapter 22, there's sort of I'll just go through this. It's sort of like an 8-step process that occurs. So here's the 8 steps that occurs. So first of all, in verse 1 to 3, the trial is outlined to Abram. We know it is, you take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. And there's his response, his immediate response in verse 3. So there's a trial and his response. Then what happens is, of course, on the third day, it says, there's the vision of what's to come. On the third day, he lifts up his eyes, he sees the place afar off. He's looking, and he's looking afar off. There's a vision of that which is to come. In verse 6 to 8, it talks about the father and son are united together. Twice it says they went both of them together. Now, as we're thinking about this, and this is really what we want to drive to, and that is this, that when you stop and think about the way the chapter's written, of course it's about Abram offering his son, but the whole language of the chapter is telling us it's a shadow of Yahweh offering his son, just by the way it's constructed and written. So that's, we'll see that again in a moment. It's easy enough to see that. That's the way the language, the way the chapter's written. It's not sort of like just a man offering his son. The way the language is couched, your only begotten son. As soon as you hear that language. So they both go together. Verse 9 to 10, the offering is made. And I want to say this, and Isaac's slain and received again from the dead. We're going to see that. And then there's divine intervention. You've done this. I know now that you fear God. And then there's a ram provided in the thicket and so forth, that they might worship as they had said they would do, on the basis of what Yahweh would provide for them. There's a shadow of the offering of the son again, the ram caught in the thicket. And then the second call out of heaven, and the promise is confirmed, the promise is completed, and so forth, because, and here's the phrase, because you've done this thing. Now that's what important, what I'm going to come back to later. You've done this thing. And then they return to Beersheba, it says, and then they all rise up and go together. So of course it's the father and son going together to that place of sacrifice and of the son being raised again, but when they return, they're united on the basis of that, and they all return to Beersheba. They all rise up and they all go together. So that unity between father and son is now shared amongst others. So let's just look at just a couple of some of these things here just for a moment. So God tests Abram. Now, you take your son, and they're commands. You take and you go and you offer. Now you just think about this, brothers and sisters, for a moment. All those years of barrenness, all the distress in the household, and then Sarah's comforted, and the son is brought forth. And all those years of distress, and all those years of discomfort in that household, and the tents filled with joy and rejoicing and thanksgiving, the voice of praise. And the years go by. And this is probably another, like we said, we think Isaac was probably, we're not told, are we, but maybe 33 and a half. We don't know. But he wasn't a boy. He was called after all this time, you imagine Abram's there, and when he's asked to do that, you think about it, and I reckon it would have gone through his body like an electric shock. When he's asked. But you see, the fact of the matter is, and this is what you've got to stop and think about, this, brothers and sisters, who's asking him to do it? And you see, that's what sits behind it all the time. So in this verse here, where it's his response, and this is the way it is, you just think of this. He rose early, he saddled his ass. So he did it. He gets up early in the morning because that's what he does when he's distressed about other people. He did it 3 times in his life. He gets up early. He could have had someone arrange that for him, and then he chooses 2 of his young men. So he does that, and then it says, and Isaac his son. You've got 3 things there, and Isaac his son in the middle, and then it says, he goes and splits the wood for the burnt offering. All that wood. Then he rose up and he went to the place. Of which he had been told. And you see, you've got 3 things. Isaac in the middle of 3 things, and you go, it's activity. It's activity. This is how he's coping with this. Is he coming to terms with what's happening? This activity of it, right in the middle of it, and Isaac, his son. Right in the centre. You think, well, that's the sort of person that he was. By faith, it says in Hebrews 11, by faith, when Abram was tried, he offered up Isaac. Now, so that's in the perfect tense in the Greek. You can look it up. So that means, in the perfect tense, it means it's a completed action. By faith, Abram, when he was tried, he offered up Isaac. Finished. And then it says, and he that had gladly received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. And that's in the imperfect. It means it's a continuous action that's not completed. And so what we understand by that possibly is accounting that God was able to raise him from the dead, by which he received him in a parable. So you see, when he's asked to offer Isaac, because of who asked him to offer, he does it. But in the process, as he's going to Mount Moriah, he's offering him in his mind over and over and over again. You can imagine it. They go a day, they have to stop and then they have to camp. What are you thinking about? I mean, as soon as you wake, but you see, it says he was accounting that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which he received him in a parable. What does that mean? And this is what we just want to see, talk about this in a moment. Because you see, when it says in verse 4, on the 3rd day, you see, on the 3rd day, Abram lifts up his eyes and he sees the place afar off. On the 3rd day. And that must ring a bell with you. He sees the place afar off. Now you can search the New Testament and you'll find how the 3rd day is used. It's more often than not used on the day that Christ rose. So on the 3rd day, he sees the place afar off. He's going to receive him back in a parable. He knows that from Genesis 3:15 there's going to be a deliverer who's going to be sacrificed. He starts to understand exactly what God's doing. He says, I'm going to show you the place. I'm going to show you what's going to occur. It's going to be my only begotten son. And we know that because you see, in this chapter, there's a whole play on the words to see. He saw the place afar off. When Isaac says, my father, where's the lamb? And Abram says, God will provide, or the words to see, himself a lamb. And then Abram lifted up his eyes and he saw the ram caught in the thicket. And he called the name of the place Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh will be seen, or Yahweh will provide. And it means both. In the mount of Yahweh it shall be seen. What's going to be seen there? And what will they see? And I believe, sometimes you talk to people and say, well, what did Abram understand? I go, he understood everything. You comb through these chapters and there's nothing that he didn't really understand. He's not going to be raised and be surprised. Why, did you know the offering of the only begotten Son of God was on Mount Moriah? Yeah. And see, Jesus says this, like Jesus of Nazareth says this. John 8, he says, your father Abram rejoiced, here's the play, to see my day. Now that word there, and he saw it, so that's a play on Genesis 22, and he was glad. But you see, he says, your father Abram rejoiced to see my day, and that means to express a state of great joy, often involving, I've got this written down here, verbal expression and appropriate body movement. In other words, I believe that's talking about the day of his birth. That's when Abram rejoiced. It's the only place in the record where you see him rejoicing. He's glorifying God on his face, laughs in his heart. He's got appropriate, he's appropriate body there. And then the other word, appropriate body movement. And then the last one, he was glad. It means a state of happiness, a state of well-being, and one thing he said, a state of calm. And you can imagine when they're coming back from Mount Moriah, how he felt. A state of calm. Absolute happiness. So he said, I think that's referring both to the birth of Isaac and the offering of Isaac. So when it says he saw the place afar off, of course, I believe it's saying about the city, seeing the place where he's going to receive Isaac back from the dead. He's also receiving him a parable. So he knows that this is the place where God's going to offer his only begotten son, and he's going to be raised. Well, he says there, of course, then Abram says to the young men, will you abide here? And I and the lad will go yonder, and we're going to worship, and we'll return to you. Well, that's how he saw it. We're going to go to that mountain, and we're going to worship. Imagine how you're lifting your mind to that extent. It's going to be an act of worship. And that's exactly the place where Solomon built the temple. It says in Chronicles at Moriah. That's exactly where the temple in the age to come is going to be. And Psalm 99, which is talking about that time, it says, exalt Yahweh our God and worship at his footstool. It's Moses and Aaron and Samuel it talks about there. Exalt Yahweh our God and worship at his holy hill. These all nations are going to come there and they're going to worship in the age to come. And their basis of worship, of course, is going to be the offering of Yahweh's only begotten Son for the sins of the world. It's a place of worship. And then, of course, there's the altars, because you see, he built an altar. So as soon as you build an altar, he built an altar at Shechem. It means the burden bearer. As soon as he's built an altar and he's worshipping at an altar, Abram has an understanding of Genesis 3:15. He's offering on the basis of faith. That's why Isaac said, well, where's the lamb for a burnt offering? That's what we always, that's what we've constantly used in our worship. And at Bethel and Hebron and now at Moriah. So you see, Abram's being shown the place. You will go to the place. The place. And he's being shown the manner. As he had been shown, sorry, I've got my notes here. I need to write things out clear. He's being shown the place of Isaac's offering. as he had been also previously shown, the manner of Isaac's birth. It will be of God. This son will be begotten of God. This is the place where he will be offered. So you see now, in this offering of Isaac, Abraham will understand that the father, he's entering into the father's experience of providing an only begotten son whom he loved for the benefit of others. This is what we really want to see, brothers and sisters. It's entering into this understanding that completed the vessel in that sense for Abram. And they went both of them together. And John 16 says, "Behold, the hours come, yea, now is that you, that he's on the souls, that you will be scattered, every man to his own, you shall leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me." And when he called out to his father, like out of Psalm 18 and Psalm 18 says, because as David written that psalm, and it says, "And Yahweh came down upon a cherub. He rode upon a cherub, and darkness was under his feet." And there was an eclipse, wasn't there? The father and son both walked together. And there must have been here, because the record doesn't say, but when Isaac, the understanding between Abraham and Isaac, what's happening here, it's only when Isaac asks, of course, that we believe that it's at that time Isaac understands that he's going to be the offering. And so they come to the place. What is it? The place of the skull. This is Golgotha. We know it's going to be transacted there. There's going to be something crushed. But see what happens. You see, hear this process. And think about Abram. Think about the process he's going through. He builds the altar. He arranges the wood. He binds Isaac, his son. He lays him on the altar. He stretches out his hand. He takes the knife to slay his son. You see all the detail? That's the father of the only begotten son. And you know, Brother Reg read that really well, because this is what I believe happened was this. Abram took the knife in his hand to slay his son. Now the angel was there watching, of course. Now the angel would have known immediately in Abram's mind, the moment that thought ran through his mind, that he's going to slay him. See, it was just, we always think before we act, even if it's involuntary. And you'd have seen the thought. That's when he called. That's why he called twice. Stop. Isaac was already slain. Now I know that you will withhold nothing from me. Now Abram and Sarah were heirs together of the grace of life. They had had their names changed. And Isaac was their most precious possession. You think about it. You haven't withheld anything from me. And you see, you turn this around and you think like this. It's not Abram building an altar, it's Yahweh. He's building an altar. It took him 33 and a half years to build it. Then he arranges the wood. And he prepares, you know, the nation, the trials. His son's bound. He's laid upon the altar. He's lifted up. stretches out his hand. His son's crucified. You see, that's what Abram experienced. The cost of the sacrifice. So in Romans 8, Paul says this, he that spared not his son, but he delivered him up for us all. How shall he not with him also freely give us all things? If this is what he did. Who's going to lay anything to the charge of God's elect? God that's justified them by this sacrifice? Is he going to lay a charge to them? And who's going to condemn? Christ that died, Isaac that laid down his life, and yea, rather that's risen again. He's even at the right hand of the Father. What's he doing? He's making the intercession for us. So there's the faithfulness of God. So of course they then worship, with Isaac, Abraham, Isaac. God then provides the ram caught in the thicket. And you see, I'll just for a moment, just before that, you see the ram's caught in the thicket. And here's the thing. You see, it's caught with its horns. That's the Son of God. That's God manifestation. That's the Father and his Son. The horn. But it's caught in a thicket, which represents the flesh. And the only way that ram's going to be delivered out of that is by its own sacrifice. In that sense, it's going to be a sacrifice. Now, the fact of the matter is, in a certain sense, that God could have said, you can take an animal and you can slay it, and it's representative enough for the condemnation of sin. I'm happy with the arrangement, you can express faith in it, and that could have been the arrangement. The public condemnation of sin. That's what was being displayed typically through all that sacrifice. But the thing is this, that you see, there's something that wouldn't have done. And Paul tells us what that is. He mentions that, but he talks about that in Hebrews, where he says this. He talks about the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God. It will purge your conscience from dead works, he says, to serve the living God. This sacrifice will purge your conscience. You will enter in and understand what's been done, and your life will be forfeit. And will purge your conscience. So we want to come now just for a couple of minutes to this phrase, you've done this thing. To Psalm 22, you can see what we're talking about. You've done this thing, which was a shadow. And of course, when we come to Psalm 22, we know what Psalm 22 is about, but it's just the latter part of the psalm here. We just want to talk about just for a couple of minutes, and then we're nearly finished. So here is the future. Now you see in Psalm 22, it's the words of Christ, my praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. So here this is in the future, the saints are raised, a great congregation, but of course it was Yahweh that provided this sacrifice, and the Son of God saying, my praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. And you see, brothers and sisters, that here it is, it's the memorial meeting. The meek shall eat and they shall be satisfied. That's what they're doing. And your heart shall live forever. It's living bread. And all the ends of the earth shall memorialise They will remember and they will turn unto Yahweh. And all the kindreds of the nations there shall worship. We shall go and worship before thee. And you see, you come down to verse 30. A seed shall serve him. Here's Abram's seed. It shall be accounted for a generation of the race. You know, it's just one generation out of all the generations. It's this seed. Why are they serving him? And they shall come to that place and they shall say, this is your righteousness declared and upheld. Unto a people that shall yet be born. He's done this thing. The offering of his only begotten Son. He's done this thing. And so you see, brothers and sisters, that's what I believe, that in the perfecting, as Abram's brought to this perfection, like his faith is perfected, the very thing that is happening to it at the same time is he's entering into this arrangement, and he's understanding the cost of it, because he in that arrangement is taking the place of the Father in heaven. This perfecting, he's entering into that sacrifice, he's understanding the cost of it. So you see, here was the perfecting of his faith. He's asking Abram to enter into this thing that he would do. And as for us, you see, we're like the lads. You stay here, and the Father and the Son, we're going to go there and we're going to worship. We're just onlookers. We can try and enter into that arrangement. We can partially enter into it. We can understand it from Abram's point of view. We can understand the relationship between the Father and his Son. We do understand the depth of that. He's saying, no, you'll not experience this as a type, as a son that's being offered. You'll be as the father of faith. I made you a father of many nations. You're going to enter in this and experience this, and you're going to understand the anguish and the great cost of a father offering his only begotten Son. So you see, brothers and sisters, when we think back, I think there's a process here, that in the birth of Isaac, remember we went back and we looked last week at the birth of Isaac. I'll give you a son from her. It'll be a gift. Remember what happened? They went down into Abimelech's house and they deceived Abimelech at the time. Oh, he's my brother. Didn't she say herself, he's my brother? She said it herself. Abram says, she's my sister. So at the very time when this son is being given, remember that, we saw they were undeserving of that gift. And it was Yahweh fulfilling his purpose. I made sure that you didn't touch her. You would have sinned against me. Because my purpose there was being outworked in their lives to fill this earth with my glory. That was God's purpose. But you see, in the establishment of that purpose, and it's the same for us, we're undeserving of it, but we become the benefactors of it. We're the benefactors. So when you come to this, of course, there was the fact, and we can understand, therefore, that we are benefactors, that God's going to fill the earth with his glory. That's his purpose, and we are undeserving benefactors of it. But then we come to this here in Genesis 22, what God allows us to do is he allows us to enter and says, now I want you to understand the actual cost of it. What it cost. So 1 John 4 says, here is love, not that we love God, but God loved us. He sent his Son to be a place of propitiation for us. And if God did that, beloved, if God so loved us and we go there, then we ought to have a love for one another. We've got to show that. before I come here, I think about you all. I want to go out there. I want to go out to Kaipo, and I want my brethren this to be of benefit. You know, because we're brethren. And here's this, I want you to think about this because the thing, Abram's seed, now think about this, they do the works of Abram. You see that? That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So there's some thoughts on the offering of Isaac and bringing Abram to that perfection. The work was completed in him now. The vessel had been finished. It was going to be a vessel unto honour, a vessel unto future glory, because in the next chapter, of course, the next two chapters are a burial place for Sarah, a wife for Isaac, and then his death. But the work was finished, completed. So, brothers and sisters, we want to close in our closing hymn tonight. It's a breaking of bread, and we're not breaking bread. But wherever, Lord, thy people meet, there they behold the mercy seat. See? That's what we see there. And wherever we seek thee, thou art found. And therefore every place becomes hallowed ground.